Charles, what makes your work different from others?
Well, what I noticed in my research, in my literature review, was that no group had studied whether third parties were any different really than independents. Those who studied them who studied third parties primarily focused, number one, on presidential elections. There was a lot on, say, Ross Perot and his election, John Anderson on his election in 1980, Strom Thurmond in 1948, and so on. And there had been little on those in statewide elections as well. It almost entirely focused on, like I said, on the presidential races. And secondarily, all of it had grouped third parties and independents together as kind of anything that's not Democrat or Republican. And so I thought it was important to study the differences between those groups and what causes a person to, say, decide that they are a libertarian or a Green Party member or so on versus an independent in a given election. And what I found is that since there's not really any strong correlation between, or not any strong difference in correlation between the two groups, what seems to be most likely is that it just happens to be what is simplest or easiest in a given state, because each state governs the rules of its own elections. Say Connecticut had 4 candidates who ran for office as an independent or third party, and got more than 10% of the vote. That's Connecticut, Alaska, and Minnesota had numbers that high, which is extremely unusual. And so those states, what I found is that they have easier laws for third-party and independent candidates. In some cases, it's easier, for instance, in Alaska, to get on the ballot as a write-in candidate. That happened with Lisa Murkowski this past year. It also happened in 1998. That's the only time where they were write-in candidates. Whereas some states like Minnesota are very easy with third parties. They give a great amount of financing to a third party. If they get more than 5% of the vote, then they get the same funding that the Democrats and Republicans get, the same public financing. So it has everything to do with that, which is what none of the other research had covered.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I would also like to say that it is hefty because it is so comprehensive.
Lots of charts and graphs in there as well.
That too, although as a political philosopher that doesn't interest me as much as the historical background, which you thoroughly go through third parties, the party system in the United States, and then the theoretical framework. All of that he said about Duverger is here in the thesis. And when you, in fact, mentioned in your presentation that perhaps no one in the room had heard of Duverger, you were speaking to the students, of course, but even then I thought, well, that's not right, because certainly when I was an undergraduate, Duverger was taught as the classical work about political parties, so you chose the classical framework to use. And then, when you actually do your research, you do not choose just a few states, right? You choose every single state. I mean, we've got all the data from every single state since you're going to do governorship.
27 state secretaries of state, state boards of elections, state ethics board for the campaign finance and the election results. It was a disaster, but it got done.
Was there not, did I not see a mention here at one point that in some places they wanted some kind of money to release some of the information?
Again,
especially about the finances, wasn't it?
Right, yeah. Like I said, each state determines, not only do they determine how they run their elections, they determine how they keep records of those elections. So some states don't even keep records beyond, even of the percentage of the vote that their candidates for governor and senate got past maybe 5 years, 10 years. And so since I had a 20-year span, it was relatively difficult in some cases to piece that together. Some states require some kind of a fee to get their records. Some states require different periods of time to release them. Some states don't even release them at all. Every state has a different agency to take care of it. Like I said, in some states the Board of Elections does the finance and the election results. In some states you have to go to the Board of Ethics for the finance results or something like that, or a separate campaign finance board, and then the election results are somewhere else. And so it was very much a challenge to piece together in those states, in those 27 states where there was a third-party candidate or an independent candidate for governor specifically to get those results. Now for Senate, it was a little easier because all that is kept with the Federal Election Commission because they're elections for federal office. And so they were very helpful in having the campaign finance data and the election results relatively accessible and at no charge.
What you should do is that just making a suggestion. If you use several primary sources, you develop some areas and revise them and send them out for publication as articles, so that others will also read your work. And from there, your name will be cited in different works and so forth. I'm suggesting that it could be done. Yes.
Especially since it is such an important issue, as you say,
Yeah.
the recent candidacies of the third parties and the independent candidates, they're blooming in a sense. So
Right.
this kind of information, which gives you all this historical background and gives you a framework with which to understand this situation. And I also want to point out to the students, you notice that it's important that after he did all this work, he found out that there was no significant difference. And his question about it, that's not bad. That's, that is the fact, all right? That it didn't really matter in terms of the things that you looked at, whether you were an independent candidate or you were affiliated with a third party. That's information. That's knowledge. That's something new, right, about this.
Right. This year, 2010 rather, saw more strong third-party and independent candidates in any year since 1994, which of course was right after Perot in 1992 sort of inspired a third-party sort of ideology, and so it was very important to look at that, especially because the third parties in 2010 who ran and in some cases who won were former office holders from their states, very qualified, having high name recognition, and got very high percentages of the vote. Even in many cases, got a higher percentage of the vote and won got a higher percentage of the vote than either major party and won, or at least got a higher percentage than one of the two major parties, which is very unusual and very impressive for a third party or an independent.
So we have all this information about elections, this new trend in elections, but we end, your last sentence I just want to read, with hope. Hope, the audacity of hope, eh? With hope, American democracy will be victorious in the end. So you have a very hopeful view of the future, continued explosion of